So Dr. Bill Woods, OBE, recognised not just by the late Queen, but also greatly recognised in Brazil through honours and recognition that you've had in the state that you lived in there. Bill, where do you consider home? Is it here in Bangor in Northern Ireland, or is it in Brazil?
Well, I was in Brazil for 58 years, and I think today that I feel more at home in Brazil. And my home in Brazil, the doors never closed. There are people coming in all the time, and so it's hard to forget all those years.
And you're heading back again in just a few weeks?
Yes, I'm heading back for a few weeks. I look forward to seeing the staff at the hospital, neighbours, pastors, friends, and it's nice to get back to see them again.
You told me a wee while ago that you think in Portuguese and you read in Portuguese.
Yes, I think in Portuguese, and I have my one-year Bible in Portuguese, and my telephone's all in Portuguese, and my iPad's in Portuguese.
Brilliant. What a wonderful way to be so fluent.
Yes. People ask about it. Is the language hard to learn? I said no, but the first 50 years are the worst.
But it wasn't the language you grew up speaking, because in East Belfast, in Ranelagh Street, when you appeared, you were very much an East Belfast man, weren't you?
That's right.
And that's where you first came to know the Lord, when you were living in that part of Belfast?
Yes, I grew up in East Belfast, Ravenhill, Castlereagh. We moved about a lot. My father used to say he was going to put the wallpaper on with drawing pins so he could take it with us. But it was between the Castlereagh and the Ravenhill Road.
And what were the early influences on your life spiritually? Was it at home? Was it at church?
No, the influences on my life was, first of all, when I was 12 years of age, I joined the 30th BB company attached to Orangefield Presbyterian Church. And the officers from the BB and the Sunday school teachers in the Orangefield Church had a great influence on my life. One Friday night they took us to a mission in McQuiston, which was held by Oswald Smith, a famous preacher from Canada. And I indicated my desire to become a Christian. But because I was 12, they gave me a little decision card to write my name on. But certainly the officers and the Sunday school teachers in Orangefield had a great influence, and I knew that I needed to be saved, but just didn't know how to go about it.
How did that story develop?
2 years later, when I was 14, my mother and my brother Bob and I were going out to church. We lived in Ravenhill Road, so we're going to Ravenhill Presbyterian. And my cousin arrived, and she said, "Will you come with me to my church?" And she took us down to the Ravenhill Free Presbyterian Church, and that was my introduction. My mother and my brother were both away from the Lord, so they didn't go back again. But I went back, went week after week, until finally, on the 13th of July 1952, I put my hand up to Peel and said I wanted to be saved. And then I remembered my cousin was in the meeting, and I thought, I know what's happened. She'll run straight up and run right up the Ravenhill Road into the house and tell, and my brothers, they're going to laugh and so forth. So I slept out. But the following Sunday, she was away, and I went in the inquiry room. I was 14, and I asked the Lord to save me. I didn't tell anybody at home, never said a word. But on the Wednesday night, my mother pointed at me, and she said, "You got converted." I said, "How do you know? Who told you?" I was flabbergasted. I said, "Who told you? How did you know?" She said, "Nobody told me." She said, "I saw the difference." I wasn't aware, but the Lord had made a difference in my life. sometimes if I doubt my salvation, go back to that day and say, well, when I was 14, you made a difference. So
That's wonderful. And there began a journey that took you, into the centre of Belfast? You went to the Belfast High School.
yes.
And knowing you're a doctor now, you must have been an ace student there.
No, I was a very bad student. Always. I went to Orangefield Primary School, and I got the cane every day because I couldn't learn my spellings. And the teacher sent me the headmaster. He gave me the cane. Just sent again. The headmaster sent for my mother, but I still can't spell. And then I went to Belfast High School, and in the physics questions, I took 0 3 times, and the physics teacher wouldn't let me back into his class. My average in Latin, I think, was about 9 in 100. Now, I didn't get the cane in Belfast High School, but I got my mother's shoe every time the report came home. So, finally, the day that the leaving certificate was then called the senior certificate, when that results came out, I went into the office to find out, and the staff looked at me and said, no, you couldn't have passed. The marks you've been getting all year, you couldn't have passed. And they were amazed that I had got my senior certificate. There was no credits, no honours, nothing like that. Simply passed in 4 subjects. To me at that moment it was useless because I couldn't use it to go on further education. I'd have to start all over again. But in the plan of God for my life, it was very important. And I'll tell you in a minute or two why.
Tell me now, why?
Well,
why was it so important?
Many years later, I wanted to get into the university in Brazil, and I had to revalidate that senior certificate in order to take the entrance exams to the university. So I presented it to the educational board. I only took a photocopy of the front. I didn't take the back, but it only said I'd only passed at ordinary level. And that gave me the right then to take entrance exams to the university.
The Lord's hand was on it even then.
Yes, even then.
So talk me through what happened after school, Bill, before we get as far as Brazil. What did you do after school? What age did you leave school?
I left school about 17 because I went right through, did the senior, we called it senior in those days. I worked for a year and then I went to Bible school. But as a teenager I had no idea, never thought that one day I would be in the Amazon. I remember when I was at Belfast High School, a man came from the educational authorities and he gave a lecture for about 10 minutes of different kinds of employment you could get when you leave school. And then he came down where I was sitting with my friend Billy McAvoy. Billy became the airport manager for a long time at Aldergrove. And he said, what kind of a job would you like when you leave school? We said, we'd like a nice soft one like the one you've got.
Had you no thoughts at all about what you would do? I mean, did you see yourself in a practical subject or
no.
an office job? Or?
No. Well, I went to work in an office. But shortly after I was saved, there was a missionary meeting in my own church, and the speaker was Mrs. Eads, better known as Jessie Munn, from the Shore Road. She made an appeal and said, all the young people, you come to the front and say, I'm here, Lord, if you want me, send me, I'm willing to go. And I was one that went forward. So I went home and told my parents, I'm going to work in the mission fields. My father said, mission fields? You'd be lucky if you get as far as the potato fields.
Not a lot of encouragement at home then, but plenty of humour. And I suspect that humour has stood you in good stead over the years.
Yes, indeed.
So you went to study in Bible College. That was the WEC College in Scotland.
Yes, I went to the WEC Missionary Training College for 2 years.
And how did you find that?
Well, the Glasgow air didn't agree with me, and I was always sick. And at the end of my first term, the staff called me into their sitting room and they said, don't come back. You'll never make it to the mission field. And at the end of my second term, they called me in again and said, don't come back because you'll never make it. No missionary society with your health will accept me. So I was 58 years in Brazil and they're all dead.
School didn't go brilliantly. Your health seemed to be against you. But as you say, 58 years in Brazil later, the Lord very clearly had his hand on you and a path laid out ahead for you to go down.
Yes.
You went to Brazil to do what?
I went to Brazil to work with the Acre Gospel Mission in the interior of the state of Amazonas. And yes, I'm very conscious. I was just an ordinary boy, brought up in a working class family in a parlour house in the Ravenhill Road. And yet the Lord has done so much for me over my life. And it is the Lord. And he has to have all the glory, because I was nothing, just the Lord stepped in.
How did you come to be with the Acre Gospel Mission when your health was so much against you when you were at Bible college? They said no one would take you. I know the Lord had a plan for you, but
yes,
on what grounds did Acre accept you? To do what?
Well, the thing is, I knew the missionaries very well from the Acre Gospel Mission. And when I was in the WAC college, the British leader for the WAC mission came to speak to us, and I went and I said, oh, I'm very interested in Brazil. I think the Lord is calling me to Brazil. And he said, well, we wouldn't send you to Brazil because we have no workers in Brazil. Maybe we could send you to Colombia in 2 years after, if you've been approved by the Colombian field, then you might go to Brazil. So he wrote to the field leader from Colombia and asked him would he accept me for 2 years. And he wrote back and said, he didn't know anything about me. He wrote back and said, no, he's better going to Brazil with the Acre Gospel Mission. And so I concluded that was what I had to go to Brazil with the Acre. I went to Brazil to work as a missionary in church planting in the interior of the state of Amazonas.
In those early days, what year was it you went to Brazil?
I went in 1960.
1960. How did you take your leave from your family and from your church and from Belfast? Because it still was a very big commitment in 1960 to go that distance.
It was a very big commitment, but for me it was an adventure, the trip to Brazil and all that. It was worse for the people at home, but for me it was a great adventure. And I had a brother who lived in Germany, and when I got on the boat to leave for Brazil, he had sent me a portable radio and a letter, and the boat went to Lisbon, and in every town there was a letter from him waiting for me. And when it went to the island of Madeira, Barbados, Trinidad, Belém, Manaus, every time there was a letter from my brother. So it sort of eased it. And of course for me it was an adventure.
Do you remember your first experience of Brazil?
Yes, I remember when the boat came into Belém, we got our first view of Brazil. And the first thing that struck me was I saw a sign for Coca-Cola. I couldn't believe it, but that was in Belém. Where I lived, of course, we didn't have that. But that was right at the coast, the big city at the coast.
Today, young people going off on mission trips, as they would call it, or taking a gap year or whatever, they jump on a plane and away they go. It wasn't as easy as that first time round, I suspect, for you. 1960, it was a big commitment to go to Brazil.
No, it certainly was very different. We went to Brazil, we went to the city of Manaus, and there we went through the customs and police and all that sort of thing, and went straight to the interior. And I went to a town that was just 2 streets in the middle of the jungle, built on the edge of the river. The town was mostly wooden houses all falling apart. We never had meat and bread or anything like that. It was very primitive.
So the first posting then, you were in, not in Manaus, you were in Belém?
Yes, I didn't stop in Belém. The boat that I went right up the Amazon, 1,000 miles to the city of Manaus.
Most people will only have seen anything to do with the Amazon on television or in film. Paint a picture for me, Bill, of what it's actually like. What does it sound like and smell like and feel like, and what are the hardships or the benefits of being there?
I have walked through the forest and slept in the forest and lay down on the ground in the forest, so I would hear the sounds of the crickets and the different noises from the forest, and the mosquitoes and the ants. And our area, of course, is very damp area. It wasn't area. So you would be, many times you would lie down with wet clothes and then spend the night lying in the forest floor.
And for a boy with not the best of health,
Yes,
that was quite an undertaking.
yes,
So those early days you were church planting,
yes, I was working.
and at one point you realised that you wanted or you needed to have other qualifications.
No, I had no qualifications. I'd been to Bible school, but that was just missionary training college. And in our home, we were brought up during World War II, and there were two medicines in our home. One was Fenning's fever cure, and no matter what you had, you were dosed with Fenning's fever cure. And if you had nothing wrong with every Friday night, you got a dose of Californian syrup of figs. And I arrived in Brazil, that was what I knew about medicine.
Did you bring them with you?
No.
So what did you do if you got sick in Brazil in those days?
What did you do? Well, where I lived, if you got really sick and needed to get out, you had a hard time getting out. You know, getting a plane out was a difficulty. And getting a boat to take me down to Manaus, the city. I was travelling on a boat. I was moving from the town that I lived on to another town called Boca do Acre. And I became sick on that boat. I didn't know anything, but I had pain in my side and I was vomiting and fever, and I thought this has to be appendicitis. And of course I got to Boca do Acre, and then I had to go to Rio Branco. And Dr. Tom Geddes and his wife were living in Rio Branco. And I got there and he confirmed, yes, you have appendicitis. And he said, just stay here and I'll go get somebody to give the anaesthetic and we'll operate. And he came back. I said, well, where are you taking me? What's happening to me? He said, well, the hospital, the general hospital, the theatre is not very good and they mightn't have a bed. So we're going to take you to the maternity hospital, for they have a good operating theatre. And then we'll put you on a stretcher and carry you over and stay in our home. Actually, I stayed in their bed and they slept on the floor after I'd had the surgery. So you know the story, do you? They operated on me in the maternity hospital and they were trying to waken me up. And I saw a woman and I said, how are you? She said, I'm a midwife. I couldn't understand midwife. She said, yes, you've just had a baby boy. So she said, what are you going to call it? I said, Paisley.
Who had been your minister back in Belfast, presumably. Even coming out of an anaesthetic, the humour was still there. Generally, was your health quite good though in Brazil?
Yes, I had typhoid once and dengue fever twice. And I had malaria more than 40 times. But apart from that, I was always very healthy.
Apart from that. So Bill, you're working as a church planter.
Yes.
You're working with other missionaries. You're travelling into the Amazon.
I arrived in Brazil and I went to work in a very small town called Canatama. First year I was there, I worked with English missionaries and we were putting up the church building. It was a very small town and we had a very small congregation. Then they went home on furlough and I was left on my own. That was in 1960. I was there, I went in 1961, now in 1962 I was on my own. Now there are two things that happened to me in 1962. First of all, wonderful missionaries arrived from America, but they hadn't come to work in the town. They had come to contact and try to win a very hostile tribe of Indians in the forest near Canatama, Arnold Joyce Abrahamson. And Arnold would go right up into the Indian territory, built a house for himself and his family, and then built a house for the woodsmen that would go with him into the forest. And from time to time he would walk, it would take 3 days to get to the Indian villages and back again. And he never saw the Indians leave presents for the Indians. You know, combs, beads and knives and something like that, hoping that they would realise that he was different from the other, the hunters and so forth. the Indians had killed anybody that went in. I went with them on some of these trips, and it was in October 1965, I think. We were doing it for about 3 years, 66. We were doing that for 3 years. He and I finally met the Indian chief and his wife, and that was the first peaceful contact with the Indians. I didn't go back, I moved, and he kept up the contact and eventually would go and live with the Indians. And not only live with the Indians, but he was able to take his family in and stay with the Indians. The woman that I met became very ill. Her family went out and dug her grave, and then they carried her out and lowered her hammock into the grave. And she lay back in the grave and waved goodbye to her family, and they filled it in and buried her alive. The woman that I met. He tried to stop them, but they were going to kill him. They wouldn't. He learned later, living in the Stone Age, she'd never had a shoe on her foot or a dress on her back, anything like that. She knew there was life after death, and she knew there was a paradise. And in her idea to get into paradise, if she was buried alive, she had a better chance of getting to God's paradise.
How do you minister? How did you minister to people like that?
Yes, well,
with
I
those
lived
beliefs?
with them for many years. He gave about 25 years of his life to the Indians, and he died very prematurely. His wife kept up the contact with. She remained in Brazil for. She completed 60 years of service in Brazil, and when she left Brazil, 5 of her children were missionaries in Brazil, but she kept up contact. And she believes today that some of the Indian girls have come to know the Lord. They've moved out of the tribe and come to live in the town with the missionaries. What's
the situation in that area today?
The situation?
What is the situation for the church, for unreached tribes? I know that area of the Amazon has many tribal peoples.
In the state that I live in, there are probably 3 tribes that have never been touched, still live in the Stone Age. But the government won't let anybody go near them. They've taken photographs from the air, and there will be very small numbers, but in separate places. Now, there are still quite a number of Indian tribes in the area, and in fact there are missionaries from Northern Ireland who are working with Indians in our area. But the Indians that they're working with are more or less civilized or not.
At what point and what happened to change the direction that you were going in?
Yes, I said 2 things happened in 1962. In 1962, I was called to see a young man who had been bitten by a snake. You see, the people I lived with in my first year there, she was a nurse, and people came to the house all the time for medicine. She helped, but then they still come to me and they called me. When I looked into the hammock and saw, I knew that he was very seriously ill. If he got to the hospital that day, he would maybe have a chance, but his chances were very little. And I told him, I'm going to send you on the plane to Manas. That's what I can do for you. I'll make all the arrangements, pay your passage and get everything sorted out. A plane came once a week. It landed on the river. We had no runway. The town was just surrounded by forest. If the river was too high, it didn't land. If it was too low, it didn't land. We never knew when it was going to come. So he asked, what day does the plane come? And we said, well, the plane comes on Thursday. And then he asked, what day is today? And it was Friday. So I said, I'm going to pray with you. He said, well, I don't want you to pray. I want you to do something to save my life. Well, Sunday morning, early, I saw his brother carrying him past in his hammock to be buried. And those words come back, do something, do something. At the same time, a few days later, a lady across the street had cooked some fish for me. And she called a little boy called John that was passing in the street. And said, well, come here, take this over to me. And I went to take it, but the plate was an enamel plate and it was too hot. And I got a cloth and took it. And I looked down, his hands were burnt and blistered. And I couldn't understand it. Why is he not crying? He said, oh, I cut my hands and burned my hands, I cut my feet, but I never feel pain. And I didn't know what was wrong with him. I couldn't understand it. And then I found a book in the house that spoke about leprosy, and I realised that he had no feeling in his hands and no feeling in his feet, and they were being burnt and cut and destroyed because I had leprosy. And then I discovered in almost every house in that town there was somebody had leprosy hidden away. And nobody did anything. So later on in the year, I went to Manás and I went to the head medical authorities and said, I'm living in Connetom and there are many people with leprosy, and they gave me medicine. Thought it was just medicine to stop the disease. I didn't know anything about preventing deformity or anything like that, but anyhow, that was in 1962 I started John on medicine.
It wasn't just a case of going back though with some medicine. You took your studies further and you went to train as a doctor.
Yes, well, the challenge to do something. And then at the same time, I visited the leprosy hospitals in Rio Branco. It was called the leper colony. We don't like to use that term now, but it was called the leper colony in Rio Branco. And in Manás, and particularly in Manás, a young man called Miguel was studying in the Baptist seminary, and he went to see a doctor. This was in 1963. He was surprised. The doctor put him into a room and he heard the key turning in the door. And he tried to get out, but the doctor tried to say, don't try to get out. The army are coming for you shortly. The army, yes. And the army took him, put him in the back of their truck and took him out to the leprosy colony and left him there. There were about 800 people there. Very chance of ever seeing a doctor and very chance of ever getting decent medicine. And that came as a great challenge to me as well, you know. And I keep coming back to that thing, do something, do something.
For those of us not very au fait with leprosy, I think most people are still surprised that it's still with us. How is leprosy spread? I mean, we go back to the Bible and the fact that people were astonished when Jesus touched people who had leprosy.
Of course.
Talk to me about the disease.
Well, we feel that the leprosy mentioned in the Bible is not the same disease as we have in Brazil and in the world today. Because leprosy in Brazil, we read that Moses put his hand in his bosom and come out white. It was leprosy, but leprosy doesn't turn the hand white. Leprosy can deform the hand, but it doesn't turn it white. And other reasons we don't believe that it's the same disease. Leprosy is a skin disease. And it's easily treated. Today we have complete cure if people get the cure at the right time. But for many, many years there was no cure. And so leprosy progresses and it attacks the nerves, so people get clawed hands. And not only do they get clawed hands, they lose the feeling. So then they burn themselves, cut them, and then they end up with practically no fingers and no feeling, and the same in their feet. And that's how the deformities develops.
Can it be spread from person to person? Talk to me
yes,
about,
that's how it's
talk
spread.
to me about that.
It is spread from person to person. For 60 years, the state that I worked in had the highest prevalence of leprosy in Brazil. And Brazil at that time had the highest prevalence of leprosy in the world. We brought our prevalence down 98%. Brazil brought their general prevalence of leprosy down. But I think there's a wee bit of cooking the books a bit.
How much of that 98% was down to the work of you and your team?
Yes, well, that was the team that we worked on the rivers and we did special campaigns. And I couldn't work alone, so I had a team of people working, and I trained people. And some of them started to work with me in '79 are still working. And some of them have been there for 37 years. Retire, due to retire, but they asked to come back again, and the government gives them another contract for a period. So,
how much work was being done with leprosy before you trained?
No, there was nothing. It was, well, in the towns people got medicine, but that was all, but there was very little. And the side I would see every patient had been leprosy. And that meant some of them were afraid they were going to be taken prisoner and put in the leper colonies. So they went away to the headwaters of the river, and then they didn't even leave the headwaters, they went away to live in the depths of the forest. And I decided that I would see them. And for years I travelled in boats, canoes, walked through the forest. That was how we got it moving.
So when that man asked you to do something,
yes,
and when that child brought you the fish,
yes,
and the something
yes,
became a bit clearer in your mind as to what you were being asked to do?
I knew that I didn't know anything about medicine. I had to do something. And that was 1962. It wasn't until December of 1967 that I decided that I would make the move and do something. And that it was a big change. I wrote a letter to the mission telling that I was going to Monash. I wasn't coming back to church planting work. I was going to stay in Monash and study medicine. And that was a ridiculous idea, you know, study medicine in a foreign country, somebody who'd always been a slow learner. How would I get into the university? That was the amazing thing about it all. And I stood praying and said, Lord, should I take the letter to the mission? Should I take to the post office? And a little girl called Foster came to the door. And she said, my mother wants you to know that my sister can't go back to school because she can't walk. When she walks, her feet start bleeding. Several of the family had leprosy. And I said, does your mother want bandages? No. Does she want medicine? No. You gave her medicine last week. Well, what did she want? She just said, you need to know that nobody does anything to help my sister. And I remembered the words, do something. And I took the letter to the post office and sent it off. And going out, the postmistress, Donna Sonia, called me back and she said, there's a letter for you here. And I brought it home. It was a Christmas card. But on the Christmas card, there were these words, where God's finger points, there God's hand will make the way. And it just came at the right moment that I needed it, you know.
And it was very definitely the Lord's hand making the way, because the Leaving Cert from Belfast all those years before would be part of that entry.
The amazing thing was at Belfast High School I'd never passed a physics exam. And when I had to take entrance exams to the university in Brazil. And of course I failed the physics. And that was me out. And people said, what are you going to do? I'm going to study and prepare myself for next year's exams. But I said, you know, the Lord promised he would make the way, and he did. At the end of January, the university discovered there were 8 places in the medical course that hadn't been filled. So they decided to repeat the exams. And in the second round of exams, there were 155 young Brazilians just out of high school, and one dumb Irishman had never passed physics, but I passed the second round of exams. The most interesting thing about that is I was in the university some years later, and I went into the department that took care of the exams. And I asked the professor who was in charge, how many times did the university repeat the entrance exam? Never. Oh, said yes. In 68 they repeated them. I failed in January, but I passed in February. He said, no, sir, you did not. I beg your pardon, I did. And he said, I was here in 68. And there were no exams repeated in February. And he went and got a book, and all the people who had passed the date, that had passed in the January exams, and my name constant, I passed the physics exam, I can't remember the date, I passed the chemistry exam, all in January. How did that happen? It was just the Lord had opened the door for me.
How long was your period of studying? My
period of studying was 6 years. And that was hard going. But the Lord helped us and got us through. And then I took a 2-year residency course in Rio de Janeiro in eye diseases. I was particularly interested in eyes because if a leprosy patient has no feeling in his hands and goes blind, he's really very incapacitated and can't find the spoon at meal times and can't find his way around the house. And at that time I only knew of one ophthalmologist that went 1 day a week to a leprosy hospital in Rio de Janeiro. That was the only ophthalmologist I knew that did anything for leprosy. So I took a 2-year residency in ophthalmology. And then I came to Belfast in 77 and I worked in the Royal with Professor Archer and Mr. Trevor Buchanan, and they were very good to me and helped me greatly. And finally I went to Dublin and I stayed. And I took a course for 2 months, worked in the Dublin Eye and Ear Hospital, and then I took exams from the Royal College of Surgeons for a diploma, not the FRCS, but the stepping stone, but I didn't go on. I took that exam in Dublin, and then I went back to Brazil.
What did all of that do to your faith?
Well, I think that although while those years, I think my faith was quite strong, and I knew the Lord had helped me, and the Lord was with me, and I never had any problem. When I was leaving Bible school in Glasgow, the principal's wife always prayed for each student as they left, and she always prayed the same prayer. She said, Lord, deliver them from the barrenness of a busy life. And unfortunately, times in the Acre, that I didn't pay any attention to that, and the barrenness of a busy life would have taken over. But I knew that the Lord was with me, and the Lord had helped me. When I saw people who need, today I would be very touched and very willing to help, because in that year, first year in Manassas, I really had a lot of needs, and it was very difficult. In 1979, I returned to Brazil, and the Ministry of Health said that I should go to work in Belém, which is a big city, and had a big rehabilitation centre there, and they thought I would fit in. But I went to visit colleagues in the Acre, and the Secretary of Health offered me a contract for me to come and work in the Acre. And so that was very attractive, because it meant that they were going to pay me for the work that I wanted to do. And that worked out very well. Sometime later, the Secretary of Health had to go to a meeting with the Minister of Health in Brazil, and he couldn't go. So he sent me to represent him. And when I come back, he sent for me. He said, what did the minister have to say? I cried very quickly, said, you were to give me a rise in pay. That's what he said.
Oh, you can take the man from Belfast.
Surprisingly, he did. Oh, yes. So I started my work in there. Initially, I worked with people who had eye diseases and leprosy patients, but mostly doing cataract surgery. I remember the day I took the bandage off Vicente's eye. Vicente was blind for many, many years. He had leprosy too, but he had a lot of deformity. And he was so animated because he could see after being blind for so long. So he said, I wish it was visiting time. I said, why? He said, I haven't seen my wife's face for about 10 years. Well, I knew his wife. I said, well, you do see it. Don't ask me, I'm not putting the cataract back again.
Oh, blimey.
From time to time, I would not only operate in my own state, but I went down to Manassas, the old leprosy hospital there. And Saturday I would tend to patients that I'd seen the last time and operated the last time. Mark who was going to up, and then usually on a Sunday I would spend the day operating. Usually quite alone, on a stretcher in a grubby little two-roomed health post. But the Lord was with me, and I never had any problems. One of the people that I operated on had been blind for 17 years. And you know, the quality of life, the last years of his life changed when he could see. He was round the house and see where the spoon was on the table. And so I'm grateful that the Lord enabled me to do that for many years. When I operated in Rio Branco, I had a very good operating microscope given to me by Abbott's Cross Congregational Church. And it was, at that time, it was the last, you know, up where you controlled all with your feet. And but when I did it here, I didn't have it. So I was home, and I was going back to Brazil through the state, and I was travelling with Victor Maxwell. And there was a town in Charlotte, there was a firm that sold a very good portable operating microscope. So I got in touch with the owner of it, and I said, I'm going to be in Charlotte on Saturday morning, and I want to buy your microscope. He said, but we're closed on Saturday morning. So I said, okay, I'll put it in the car, and I'll meet you. And if it's what you want, then I'll give it to you. So when I put the phone down, Victor said, how we don't know this man, how will we know him? I said, no problem. The microscope comes in a suitcase, so all we have to do is for a man with a suitcase. Victor said, where did you meet arrangements to meet him? I said, to the airport.
And did you find him?
He found us. It was what I wanted, so I bought it. And friends had told me, you're coming back to Brazil from the States, Miami, to a town called Leticia. It's just, one side of the road is Colombia and the other side of the road is Brazil. And you never have any problems with customs. That's why I planned. But I had to change planes in the capital in Bogota, and I had to go through customs. And they confiscated all my baggage. Not only the microscope, everything. Took it into a room. It was about 5 in the morning, and eventually everybody else had gone, and I was still trying to talk, but they wouldn't listen, and literally pushed me out. I went to the airline. The fellow said, I can't do anything for you. Here's your new boarding pass. You have about an hour to go, and then we'll be calling for the flight to Leticia, where you're going. So I stood and I thought, Lord, what do I do? To go back to Brazil with no baggage at all, to stay here, how do I start? I went back again to the airline, Avianca, and I explained again. The fellow said, come with me. And he took me through the offices and took me out on the patch where the airplanes were being loaded up and refueled and all. We went out to the customs shed. It was in darkness. And I said, well, we can't get in. He said, oh yes. And he pulled the lever. And the carousel that takes the baggage started going round. And he got down on his hands and knees and went through the rubber flaps, and I followed him. And I said, they put it over in that room over there, so we found it. My baggage, took it out. He put the baggage back on the carousel, and the baggage had gone out, and he was going out. And then I was just about to duck onto the flaps when a customs man came running down. And he shouted, you can't do this, you can't do this, stop. He said, I know where you're going. You're going, I'll send a radio message. I'll send a radio message. They didn't have internet and sort of things. We'll get you when you get there. So anyhow, as soon as I got out, the boy pulled the lever, and then the rubber flaps close up. There's a steel door, so he couldn't get out to get out. And when I got to the town, oh, there was a terrible hue and cry. They were opening everybody's baggage. Everybody, making everybody open their suitcase. And the man in front of me said, you know, they're looking for somebody. They've got a tip off, they're looking for something. I said, I wonder who it could be.
And did they find you?
He was taking, he had opened his suitcase, the customs man looked at it, closed it, and he was taking it off, and he thought I was a priest. So he said to the customs man, Permittu Santo Padre passare. He said, let the Holy Father go.
Are you the only Free Presbyterian that's ever been misrepresented as a priest? Mistaken?
Let the Holy Father go. I said, gracias, my filho, gracias, my filho. Thank you, my child, thank you, my child. And I picked up my baggage and run, for the customs man could understand.
Oh. And I bet that piece of equipment came in really useful.
Oh yes, that changed the whole scenario for me there. And today it's in Angola.
It's still doing the rounds.
Well, when I finish it, I'll give to a Brazilian missionary who was working in Angola.
Mm-hmm. And you haven't made it to the Vatican yet?
No.
Did you have much opportunity over those years to talk to people about your faith, about the Lord?
Yes, but I've always found it very hard to talk to people personally. But one thing I did always, and everywhere, I mean the headwaters of the river, I had a box of Bibles with me, sitting in a canoe for all day, and I gave out Bibles and gospel tracts. I remember the first trip I did on a river called the River Tejo. It's right on the borders of Peru. I think it runs seems to power line the borders of Peru, as far as up the Amazon as you could ever think. And no evangelist, no preacher had ever been on that river. Sometimes I would have meetings in the night and tend the patients during the day and then call them together. But on that river we were in a canoe all day, rain belting into us. And so I left gospel tracts and New Testaments and Bibles everywhere I went. It was some years later. I was in another town on the same river but further away down, and I went to a house and the man came out and he said he was the pastor of the town. He said, who are you? I said, oh, they called me Guilherme, that's what my nickname is in Brazil. Oh, he said, so it was you? I said, what do you mean? So it was me. He said, we went in to evangelise on the River Thames, and we thought nobody's ever heard the gospel. Nobody knows the gospel. And that was the first time an evangelist has gone in. But we found in every home people had been reading New Testaments and Gospels of John. We found many people that were ready to trust the Lord, just waiting for somebody. And we asked, how did you get these? Where did these come? And they said the man that came to treat the leprosy patient. So I didn't always preach the gospel, but at least I did have the opportunity to give out the Lord's word.
You mentioned earlier on, Bill, when you had doubts, you would remember your mother's reaction, that she had identified the change in you. Some people think of a missionary as someone who doesn't have doubts, somebody who, you know, sees miracles happening every day and they're moving forward in tremendous faith. Talk to me a wee bit about your own spiritual journey. How much does doubt play a part in the Christian life for you?
Well, it certainly does from time to time. And sometimes I said, why did the Lord not intervene? And why did the Lord not change things? And,
with people who were sick?
No, for me.
Okay.
Why did the Lord not intervene in my life? And why did things work out as they were? But then I remember that David encouraged himself in the Lord. And when those doubts come in, I think of the miracles that the Lord did in my life and people that I touched and people that I reached. You know?
His faithfulness has always been trustworthy.
Yes, well,
his promises.
Now, I always say it wasn't all grace and glory. I used to say, through many fewer sins and mistakes, I have already come. It was grace that brought me safe thus far. Grace will take me home. I got into a very busy programme. We were doing very special campaigns for leprosy, and it meant that every Monday, no, it was usually on a Sunday, 5 dermatologists came from the south of Brazil. And Monday they were in one health centre, and next Tuesday were in another. And we had to have all the medicines that they need, and the paramedics out beforehand advising the people. So it was a lot of work, and I found that the time that I had to get out the plans and make out the passages and all this sort of thing, and I thought the best time I got to do it was on a Sunday. And so for a long time, spent my Sunday with the door of my office in the hospital closed doing this. And then I said, this is not right, I'm not going back to the hospital on a Sunday. It can be all backward and get what's called all back. And it seemed as if that very next Sunday, I was getting ready to go out to church, and a woman came to the door, and she belonged to the church I was going to. And she said, my brother got a bullet in his eye, and he's in the emergency, and they've sent me to see if you would go and operate. I said, but there are 2 people on emergency duties. They get paid for doing emergency duties, but they can't find them. Which I know why, because on the weekend they turn their phones off. And she said, no. I said, no, I can't go. I'm going to church this morning. And I left her standing at the door. She was sort of weeping, and I got in my car and drove off. Well, when I was passing the hospital, I thought, no, I can't go. So I had to stop and go in. And that was about 8:30 in the morning. And then they called in a neurologist as well because the bullet had gone through the eye and into the brain. And I think we come out about 5 in the afternoon. We were operating all day. Eventually got the bullet out. The man lost his eye, but we got the bullet out of his brain. But that was my decision. I would never go on the very first Sunday that happened. However, I've tried to keep. I taught choirs and I played piano, and although I never learned music, but I played the piano in Brazil and played the organ in Brazil in the church, and I tried to keep up my contact with the church.
Did you ever marry?
Not yet.
Oh, well, there's hope.
Tried a couple of times, but that's another story.
When you look back over the 58 years, I know you're modest, but set the modesty aside for me for a moment and tell me, quantify if you can, the impact that you have had on particularly leprosy in the area?
Well, I think the impact that I had was the state had the highest leprosy prevalence for 60 years, and that was brought down. And not only that, before I went, the people came with leprosy when they had hands, with no fingers, and terrible deformity in their feet, and so forth. And that has all changed. Now, the coordinator for all leprosy in Brazil, I just had a WhatsApp message from her this week. She said she was going to write a book, Leprosy in the Acre, before and after Guilherme, that's what they call me. Because she realised the one state that really changed the prevalence was the state of Amazonas, or the state of Acre. Amazonas was second, but the Acre brought the leprosy prevalence down. And I think today that people come as a small skin patch in their tour.
And that changed because of your faith, because of your sheer dogged commitment to making a difference.
Yes.
To do something.
Yes.
And you did something.
Now, little boy that burnt his hands in 1962, when he learned that I was, had studied medicine, was living in Rio Branco, he came to live there so that I could treat him, keep care of him. His hands were destroyed by that time. He had to be hospitalised to have a leg amputated, and he met a lovely lady who was also in hospital to have a leg amputated, and of course they got married. And have a very fine son who's now a married man himself. But I saw him, he started in 1962. In October of last year, I went to visit him in his home, and that was 60 years of follow-up. 60 years. He was 12 when he burnt his hands, and he's now 70, well he was 72, 73 now.
Bill, I know you've been recognised for your work in Brazil, and I know the Queen, as we said earlier, gave you an honour as well. But so many people will want to say thank you because of what you've done and how you've changed their lives. That must leave you feeling good about what you've done, does it?
Yes, I think sometimes sitting here and looking just out at the trees now, it's past 10 days maybe without speaking to anybody, nobody comes near me, and what am I doing here? And then I remember, what the change that my life had made so many people. And that just encourages oneself, and David encouraged himself in the Lord. And
so the Lord did amazing things from that little boy in Ranley Street to the man sitting now, having transformed life for so many people in that part of Brazil.
Now, 40 years ago when I was in went to Rio Branco, there were 5 brothers, all had leprosy. And of course I treated them, and they always said, Edson was a spiritual leader, he wasn't the eldest in the family. He said there were 7 of us in our family and you're the 8th one. And I know when I go to Rio Branco, he'll be there to see me, and we'll have abraçar in the Brazilian type of abraço, Brazilian like to give you a hug, and I'm looking forward to seeing him.
So Brazil isn't just your adopted home, it has adopted you, and you're part of the Brazilian family.
Yes.
You'll be glad to be back.
It'll be nice to be back. The staff at the hospital sent me messages every day, when are you coming? And some of the pastors actually sent me messages, and so I'll have a good time seeing them all.
And your own health concerns now?
We know that all things work together for good to them that love the Lord. And 15 years ago I had to come to Ireland in December because of family problems. My brother was very, very ill and his wife had died. And I arrived in Ireland in December, just before Christmas, came down with very bad malaria. I couldn't get rid of it. And then I developed a very bad lung infection. So friends took me to Craigavon emergency, and they sent me for x-rays, and then they did a scan of my lung, gave me antibiotics, and that improved. And then they sent me to Dungannon Hospital to do a lung function test. And the doctor there said, the consultant there said, well, your lung has certainly improved. So, but he said, don't get up, the nurse is coming to take a routine blood test. Well, I was back in Brazil about 2 weeks when the phone rang, and it was a doctor from Dungannon. He said, I got the result of your blood tests, and you have to see a hematologist tomorrow. It's very urgent. Well, there was no hematologist where I lived. But a week later he rang again. Have you seen the hematologist? I said, no, but I'm going to Sao Paulo next week and I'll see the hematologist. And that routine blood test confirmed that I had multiple myeloma, which is incurable cancer of the immune system. That was 15 years ago. But because of the malaria and the lung infection, I got that diagnosis at a very early stage. And well, that's, the Lord's hand was on that.
And how are you doing?
Well, at the moment, medicine is chemotherapy that I take for the myeloma, for the cancer. It seems to be holding the cancer, doesn't cure it. It stops it from going up very quickly. It still goes up slowly, but very slowly, when I'm taking the medicines I'm taking at the moment. So it's quite amazing. It told me this medicine works for 6 months, and I took it for 2 years and 6 months, and it still worked. And that's the Lord's mercies and the prayers of God's people.
He still has his hand on you.
Yes, I know. Well,
He still has a plan.
the wonderful thing is that, you know, I'll tell you about the doctor giving me a contract and all. Well, when I was 66, not 65, they put me on a pension. I worked on normally, you know, I could have sat back and done nothing, but I kept working on normally. And I still have that pension in Brazil today. And so I use it to help pastors and build churches and all sorts of things. That's what you call fleecing the Philistines.
Bill, it has been an absolute joy to talk to you and an encouragement, so thank you.
Yes, the Lord has done great things.